Juneteenth has always been a big deal for us for as long as I can remember, because we know historically that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law, letting everyone know in this, well, letting everybody know that slaves were free and they were no longer they were no longer slaves. But it took about 2.5 years after Emancipation Proclamation for news to reach the deepest of the South, where news was hardest to reach or whatever. And in Galveston, the people that were enslaved illegally for 2.5 years were notified that they were free, and that was how we came to get Juneteenth. And that is why Juneteenth is such a big deal, especially in Galveston. And we've heard a number, I'm sure, of explanations as to why this is a huge deal and as to why it took 2.5 years. It's not like folks in the South didn't receive mail, right? Folks in the South definitely got their mail. The slave owners knew that their slaves were free. It's just that the slaves did not know that they were free. And they kept on keeping on doing what they were doing. As the troops moved from the North down to bring news to the South, um, slave owners pretty much formed like a tidal wave and tried to move beyond the news to not comply with the law, because they knew what we are learning now, which is in your mind, if you are not free in your mind, and if a community's mind is not free, the hive mind, I call it, you know how birds murmurate? You see birds and fish, they like form these pictures and whatnot. Everybody knows their position, where they go in the formation or whatever. They get information, right? They get into formation, right? But they get into formation when they receive certain information from others. Unfortunately, it has to wait for others to get this information. Anyway, so long story short, for whatever reason, the last slaves in Galveston did not know that they were free for 2.5 years after they were actually free. And they were doing free labor and all of that stuff. Now, there is an irony in that last year when I shared this story of Juneteenth, which is the story of Juneteenth that I know and love and have thought about for years, I was schooled. This is where I would put the picture of me getting schooled on YouTube right here. Now, I learned last year today, that Juneteenth, even though we all say it's the day of freedom, and we say that that's the day that the last slaves learned that they were free, there's a massive loophole. A massive loophole. And that loophole comes full circle to what we're seeing in certain states like New Jersey. So this is the part where I draw a conclusion that might not be true, but it doesn't hurt to ask certain questions, right? So troops came from places on the East Coast, including New Jersey, right? To let the folks in Galveston, Texas, or in the South, but particularly Galveston, Texas, know that they were free. The ironic part about that is we assume and we learn that all the slaves were free. But if slaves are labeled as apprentices, permanent apprentices, and they weren't called slaves, so they were rebranded, into apprentices or whatever, and they were born before a certain date above, then they were not free. They weren't paid and they were doing labor. Ironically, there were people who were apprentices, slaves, in New Jersey. In New Jersey. Remember, I said that troops came from the East Coast, including places like New Jersey? Yeah, they left New Jersey to clear out the South and let them know you're all free. But from a loophole, they still had slaves, rebranded slaves in New Jersey, because the Emancipation Proclamation, through that loophole, even though we know the spirit of the law, right? The letter of the law made it possible for these people to continue to live enslaved. So this is where I draw something, right? I love data. And I love healthcare. I love maternal health. I go crazy a little bit every year when, oh, look at that. I go crazy a little bit every year when I learn that the disparity rate for maternal health outcomes is so telling nationwide. We keep getting told that the disparity rate between a Caucasian woman having a baby and dying versus a woman of color having a baby and dying, the chances are we are 3 times higher. Actually, it is 3 to 4 times higher. Okay. But when we look at an average, what does that average do in and of itself? We know of mean, we know of median, we know of mode, right? And each number, each calculation gives us different insights, different information, a different idea of what's actually going on. When we average, we can easily leave out the outliers. So nationally, if we are hearing that the disparity rate of death for Black women is between 3 or 4 times higher than our Caucasian counterparts, when you look at a place like New Jersey and you use that label, you use that average, you're doing yourself a disservice. Because in New Jersey, you're about 7 times more likely to die if you are a Black woman. 7. So while we're running around using averages and painting broad strokes of data in healthcare, when it comes to maternal health, we also need to remember that those data points, when we're using averages, when we're using those sexy bell curves, only say so much. I do not think it is a coincidence that in the state of New Jersey, white women have some of the best outcomes nationally. So it's not like the disparity rates are showing like poor quality across the board. No. The poor quality is reserved for a few. The poor quality is reserved for you. So let's think about that. This is where I like to harp on systems and how it's one thing to address implicit bias with all of these talks and raise awareness and get outraged and get angry. But when our systems literally, figuratively, in every sense of the word, incentivize the butchering of beautiful Black bodies, when our system incentivizes the premature removal of children, Black babies, from mothers' wombs. I call it lynching. From mothers' wombs, for them to meet their demise. When the system incentivizes NICU stays, when the system incentivizes clamping that cord immediately, when the system incentivizes putting that woman on a schedule, pushing Pitocin until her or her baby are in demise, and then using that as an excuse to cut a woman open. When a system incentivizes that with money, then we don't need to ask ourselves why. History will continue to repeat itself in places everywhere, especially places like New Jersey. If we continue to leave systems thinking, incentives at the table, it will continue if we leave it at the table. That is why it is so imperative and so important to be aware of where the money's coming from, what triggers the cash flow, and be very honest with ourselves about these systems and ask ourselves, like, how do we financially incentivize doing what is right? Because if there is one thing I can tell you, and this is 2026, y'all. So the World Cup is here, right? Where do we have the highest concentration of Iranians on American soil? Last time I checked, that was near LA, right? Where's the Iranian team playing? In LA. Are we at war right now? I wonder if we're at war with Iran. But let me tell you what, those Iranian fans are coming out. They're out in the streets. And what are they doing? They are spending money. Money talks. Money talks. Why did the slave owners in the South decide that they were going to pick up their little skirts and try to run past past the cops with their Black people in tow, using them as chattel, right? Why? Because money talks. So instead of focusing on the bias, I'm in favor for establishing, fortifying, strengthening those systems that actually financially incentivize what is better. Better health, better experience for our providers, better systems, better equity, right? And actually, yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that because I'll probably do another video here soon. But that right there, if you get paid more for a woman experiencing better outcomes, then chances are some of these racist asses, some of these microaggressions that lead to death might be prevented because money talks. Anyway, happy Juneteenth. This is Lauren, and that's just me drawing conclusions that I have no business drawing, right? Have a good day.